Good morning, everybody. Good morning. I hope that you're all doing well. So we are actually going to get started because we have a lot to cover today. So I hope you've had your coffee and all that good stuff. I apologize for my voice, but my voice after a while gets a little shaky. So I apologize for that. If at any point you can't hear me or you need me to repeat something, please feel free to let me know. So again, I'm Dr. Dolores Blackwell, and we are going to be going through the rest or finishing up our training on Clinical Supervision Foundations, Part 2. So we will be leaning into modules 5, 6, and 7. And what we'll be doing today is also setting the stage to review your assignment. That will be the second part of your learning opportunity. As a reminder, there are some key things we want to do. In the chat function, please type your name and where you're from, the name that you registered under and where you're from, so that we know that you are here. That's a kind of a second layer of attendance. So type your name and where you're from in the chat. Also, if you are having any challenges with your audio or video, please let us know. I know this morning it was a little rough for me getting online, so it might be happening for other folks as well. So if you're having any challenges with that, please let us know. The other thing is that when you entered the learning area, you were on mute. If you unmute yourself at any time during our time together today, please remember to remute yourself. And also we ask that you're on video, okay, for the majority of the training, because it's super helpful for not only myself, but for other folks when you are in your pod exercises to be able to see you. If there is some challenge with that, please remember to let us know. And if it's something that we can troubleshoot on our end, we will try to do so. Today we will be going until 1 o'clock. We will, depending upon where we're landing, we'll have at least one break, but we have a lot to cover today to set the stage for your assignment. Let's see, what else? I think I covered everything. The chat we know is a part of our learning community. And so you can feel free to put comments in the chat, etc., to each other, share information, etc., or just comment, or just kind of share your insights and thoughts as you're going through the rest of the material. For today, you'll need access to the participant workbook. You'll need access to the addiction counselor competencies, that's the tab 21, and you will also need access to the assessment rubrics. Now, the assessment rubrics were sent out this morning, but we will also be dropping it in the chat, okay? We will also be dropping it in the chat. Actually, it has just now been dropped in the chat, okay? So you will need that as well. So you'll have access to those materials. The assessment rubrics, you don't need to print it up. You just need access to it. The electronic version is fine. The electronic version of all of that is fine as long as you have access to it, okay? So before we get started with this continued kind of space of collaboration and connecting and learning, I just wanted to check in really quickly and do a temperature check of how folks are doing today. How are they feeling about the last 2 days? Is there anything in particular that they wanted to share, insights, etc.?
I just want to say really quickly, I'm having tech issues, so I may be jumping in and out. I'm just trying to fix it. I can hear you on this computer, but I'm trying to get you back over here. So
No worries. Just put a quick piece in the chat so that we all my team members know.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. How many folks are very thankful that it's Thursday and are hoping that and wishing that it was Friday? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move us forward. And again, we're going to be starting with Module 5. Module 5 is really, really short, but we're going to be leaning into some important information in that module. So hold on one second. Let me just share my screen. So today we're going to be starting with Module 5, and Module 5 really does a bit of a dive into assessment resources. Now, one of the things that we need to recognize that as clinical supervisors, as directors, that we are constantly assessing our staff, assessing our program, et cetera, okay? And so when we think about clinical supervision, what are some evidence-based resources that we can utilize as a part of this assessment? While we will be leaning into a few of them today, there are other resources that are available out there in the ether, whether it's ATTC and other spaces. So while I'm introducing some assessment resources, you can also use other assessment resources as well. But the assessment resources I'm introducing now will be the ones that we'll be using throughout the rest of our time together, okay? So in this module, we have some key things that we're going to be leaning into. We're going to understand the value of the developmental perspective. This is something that we've been talking about from the time of the online training to the approaches, the models, et cetera. And now we're going to take that to the next level. We're going to link the TAP 21 to the addiction counselor competencies, or the addiction counselor competencies to the performance assessment rubrics, which you received today. So there is a connective tissue between the competencies and the rubric, and we're going to lean into that. And also assessing counselor performance and develop learning goals using the TAP 21 and the rubrics. Now, when we talk about learning goals, right, when we talk about developing professional development plans or professional goals for professional growth for our supervisees, we want to lean into things that are measurable and that are evidence-based. And so what we're leaning into is this whole premise of the individual developmental model. And you've heard about this from the prior online portion of this. And the IDM, the individual developmental model, has level 3, the 3 levels: self, autonomy, and I always have a autonomy and awareness, right? I always have to remember to look at this slide. But also you're leaning into 8 domains, right? 8 domains and 3 overriding structures. So self, awareness, and autonomy. And then you have the different structures here. So you have professional ethics, setting goals or selecting goals and plans, problem conceptualization, theoretical orientation, interpersonal assessment, individual and cultural differences. We have assessment approaches and techniques, and intervention skills, and competence, right? So those are the 8 domains that we're looking at, and then we're measuring them about where folks land in regards to awareness, autonomy, et cetera. Okay, so this is located on page 44 in your participant book, because I know this slide can be a little difficult to read. So take a look at that, because we're talking about the IDM model, and that's what we're going to be leaning into for the rest of our time together. So what does this look like in regards to the IDM? First, we want to lean into the TAP 21. Now, the TAP 21, you all have access to that, is the addiction counselor competencies. And so when you take a look at that, right, it's a fairly sizable book. You can even receive a copy of this from SAMHSA, because they have free copies that you can order, but you also have your PDF version of it. I'd like for folks to take a look at it, open it up to page 3 in the TAP 21. So you can open it up electronically, or if you have it physically, and you'll see this particular figure in that, on that page. Do folks see that? Just want to make sure that folks have access to it, or they see it. Yes, folks see it? Okay, awesome. Okay, so when we talk about competencies, right, we're talking about how do folks who work within the addiction field fulfill the requirements of their position and provide quality care. So what we lean into is the competency model, right? The components of the competency model. So when you look at this particular figure, you're seeing a number of different things. One, in the middle, you're seeing the transdisciplinary foundations, which is understanding addiction, treatment knowledge, professional readiness, and application to practice. These are the foundations that every single discipline has to be able to exhibit or manifest regardless as to their role within the addiction care. Okay, so understanding addiction, whether you're a doctor, a nurse, a social worker, KSAT, etc., everyone who is involved in SUD treatment should understand addiction. We also have treatment knowledge, professional readiness, and application to practice. This is the transdisciplinary foundation. No matter what discipline you find yourself in, you should have these competencies. Then we have the connective competencies to that. So we have clinical evaluation, treatment planning, referral, client, family, and community education, documentation, service coordination, professional and ethical responsibilities, and counseling, right? So we have the transdisciplinary foundations, which everyone needs to meet. And then depending upon your discipline, you may or may not have some different changes around how you document, etc. But everyone needs to understand addiction, treatment knowledge, professional readiness, and application of practice, okay? So I'm hearkening back to a conversation we had the other day around supervision and the amount of supervision that folks may receive. And we were talking about the different modalities and models. And some folks come with a particular requirement that they have to receive a certain amount of supervision each week, okay, or a certain amount of supervision in the month, etc. This also lends itself to some of that as well, because we know that a doctor will document differently than a KSAT, right? But it's still within the context of documentation that shows that they understand addiction, treatment knowledge, etc. Okay, so we want to be respectful of that. Does anyone have any questions about any of that? Does that make sense to everybody?
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
I was unable to find that particular figure in the tab 21 foundation.
Okay. It's located on page 3.
Yeah, when I go to page 3, it appears to be like the table of contents.
Yeah, you got to go past the table of contents and go to page 3 of the actual manual.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I had the same issue, Jesse.
Okay.
Okay.
So you got to move past the table of contents and go directly to page 3.
Of the actual manual content.
Got you.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in, Dr.
Nope,
Black.
that is okay.
I was having a similar issue. I was like, wait a minute, page 3, where?
Yes, no worries. This is a collaborative effort.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much.
No worries.
My
Did
pleasure.
everyone else get an opportunity to take a look at this? Okay, so I see a bunch of head nods. Okay, awesome sauce. Anybody have any questions about this? The transdisciplinary foundations that every discipline has to have and the competencies.
Yeah, so it's interesting, Dr. Blackwell, if I may ask a question. I'm looking at the core, the core of it in the center, right? In terms of addiction, treatment knowledge, professional readiness, application of practice. And, what comes to mind is when you start working with someone that has some of these features already coming in new in your agency, right? That you're supervising. And then at some point, how we should be able to tap and structure the ones that they don't have around the ones that they do have, because like for instance, I find, the clinical evaluation piece might be an essential component or competency that needs to be worked on, but they may have, then they also need the treatment planning piece, but they have all the other pieces, right? So I guess structuring that plan and deciding which one kind of like comes first, it's like what came first, the egg or the chicken, or the chicken or the egg, and that kind of like modality. What are we going to do first? And I'd just like to hear a little more about that also.
Yeah, we're definitely, well, that's the rest of our opportunity together. Where you're
Okay.
going to now, you have these competencies, right? So the tab 21 provides you with an evidence-based resource in which to expand on the competencies expected of anyone working within the SUD setting, right? And these are not competencies that we kind of made up on the way in. These are evidence-based competencies that you can share with your staff. One of the things I advise folks to do is their copy of the addiction counselor competencies. I would say share this with staff. Share this with staff so that they can become familiar with the competencies. So as you begin to lean into them, folks understand where they're coming from.
Okay,
Okay.
that's great. That's
I
great.
think I think you should share it with everyone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, similar to like what you had suggested. I did that already in terms of doing clinical supervision and helping them understand how clinical supervision weekly ties into their performance
Yeah.
evaluation. And some of them are like, wow, never even had this like this before. Some of them are like, wow, I never even had a job description before. So it's kind of like you're introducing them something that's beneficial for them, but at the same time some structure and understanding of what's happening, right? So this is kind of like that also.
Absolutely. One of the things that's always helped me in my career when I've been in these spaces is I operate under the assumption that I need to make sure that everyone knows. Okay. I don't operate under the assumption that people know. And the reason why I don't do that is because when we come into an organization and we begin supervision, et cetera, the things that you may find out as you're beginning to acclimate and onboard, you may find out that folks haven't had performance evaluations. You may find out that folks don't have their job descriptions. You may find out that folks haven't had supervision. So we start from that space of giving everyone that baseline knowledge, whether they know it or not. And so everyone has it. So there later on, it can't be, well, I don't even have my job description, or I've never received supervision, or I don't remember, I haven't received a performance evaluation. If we start with those basic baseline things, we're setting the stage for that supportive supervisory alliance, right? We're giving people the information that they know, and we're being transparent about what we're doing, how we're going to be evaluating, how we're engaging them in their professional growth. Okay, so I always operate from the assumption nobody has their job description, nobody has supervision, et cetera. And then I start building those building blocks. For me, that's ethical, and that's how I can start my practice, because that way I know that everyone has received this information. Okay. Does that make sense to folk? Yeah, because you don't want to find out midway in that someone doesn't know their job description and they receive a performance evaluation and they don't necessarily understand the connection. Okay, so all of that is incredibly important in bringing it in. So the addiction counselor competencies is another tool you can share. Now, there are other aspects of doing this. You can share this with everyone. You can cover it and use it as a part of your ongoing team meetings, et cetera, where you can cover a competency that particular day and really lean into that competency within your team meeting, okay, or your MDT meeting, et cetera. There's so many ways that you can implement this. So I'm just kind of throwing out some options and some ideas of how I've done it in the past. And so you can think about what works for you in the particular space that you find yourself in, okay? All right, so we're gonna move it forward. Anyone else had any insights? And thank you for that. I do want to touch, but I just want to circle back for a second. Were you surprised that folks didn't know that?
Um, yeah, to some extent I was surprised, in the context of, whenever, someone is onboarded in any agency, I think the job description should be clear.
Mhm,
And then not only the job description in terms of the onboarding process through the human resources component,
mhm,
but in that aspect, but then I wasn't surprised in the sense that sometimes everyone has different styles, and unfortunately I've been a social worker, a direct social worker, and I've been in that predicament myself where I had supervisions, and now I'm learning that I wasn't actually introduced supervision as sort of a tool to be used to work progressively towards, implementing it and how it relates to my actual performance evaluation,
mhm,
so I wasn't surprised in that sense because it's happened with me,
mhm.
as a direct care counselor, social worker, et cetera, et cetera. you know, so.
Thank you for sharing that. And that is in many ways the reason why this training was developed by OASAS, so that much of this information is shared and there's this thought process that supervisors are more prepared to provide supervision. Okay. So thank you for that. And thank you for providing the example. So let's take a look at the TAP 21. Okay, the TAP 21 in regards to the competencies. So what I'm going to do is just go through the competencies as you're seeing it on the screen, and this is located on page 39, okay, page 39 in the competencies, right? And what you're going to see is at the top, you're going to see the competency itself, right? This is competency number 24. And this competency is establishing rapport, including management of a crisis situation and determination of need for additional professional assistance. That's the actual competency. Now, within this competency, you have three particular areas. You have the expected knowledge, the skills, and the attitudes. Now, when we talk about the knowledge, that's the actual knowledge base that someone has and exhibits to be successful with this particular competency. The skills are the skills they're demonstrating, okay? They're exhibiting in regards to this competency and the underlying attitudes that are necessary to be effective within this competency. Now, the one thing that you will notice is you flip through and you share this information. I'm going to get to you in 1 minute, Jesse. As you'll notice with some of the competencies, you may not see an A, okay, or an attitudes. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. So you have the knowledge, the skills, and the attitudes. Jesse?
Yeah, you said page 39.
Yes, page 39 of the manual, TAP 21.
Right.
But you don't have to go to that page because I have it up on the slide deck.
Oh, okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's this. My page 39 is very different.
Okay, no worries.
All right.
Yeah, you got to just make sure that you're not in the participant workbook and you're in the TAP 21. That's what it is, because we're working off of two different things, I think.
Mhm.
So,
But what I'm going to say to you is that for the purposes of this conversation, set aside the TAP 21 because I have the slide up and we are looking directly at the slide.
All right. All right.
perfect. Thank you, Dr. Blackwell.
No worries. So I'm going to go through this again so that everyone kind of understands that and making sure that everyone's clear on this because this is going to be important as we continue our day together. So the competency is in the gray area, okay? The knowledge, and you see there's different levels or different things that constitute the knowledge that folks will need to have in order to fulfill this competency, the skills that folks need to exhibit, and the attitudes underlying all of this. Okay, so for example, we're seeing knowledge under this particular competency, importance and purpose of rapport building. And a skill is demonstrating effective verbal and nonverbal communication and establishing a rapport. So you're actually manifesting that, you're demonstrating it. And an attitude is recognition of personal biases, values, and beliefs and their effect on communities, communication, and the treatment process. So when you think about this particular competency, right, that's in the gray, and you take a look at these knowledge, the skills, and the attitudes, what are folks' immediate thought around this?
What comes to mind immediately is that how sometimes the knowledge is there, right? And sometimes the skill is there, but then the attitude, in recognition of personal biases, values, beliefs, that's an area that probably needs to be more developed in terms of the competency, right? And that willingness, not only to establish the rapport, but that willingness to accept that this is something that you would need to work on in order to enhance your proficiencies, right? And in working as a competent counselor slash clinician, right?
Yes.
And then sometimes what happens is that body of knowledge that they have, sometimes it really, really impacts the attitude piece also. So there's a sort of like, I'm looking at it in terms like there's like an inadvertent enmeshment with these competencies sometimes.
Yes.
So there has to be sort of like a strategic approach on how to really formulate this to be able to strategically work with the person in the best way possible. You know how we say client centered, staff centered, because the attitude, the knowledge, and the skill sometimes has sort of like an overlap, right?
Absolutely.
So it just comes to mind again, where do we start and how do we start, right? And it takes a lot of collaboration and some strategic identification on how to move forward with what we're moving forward with and when.
Yes. And is okay if I comment?
Of course, go for it.
Okay. So when we talk about that, the kind of environment for any of that to even happen goes back to our supervisory alliance, right? Because leaning into this information is going to either have an increased level of difficulty or less level of difficulty based upon our supervisory alliance with the supervisee. That's where the trust comes in, the collaboration comes in, etc. Because if we don't have a healthy or positive supervisory alliance with our supervisees, so we're going to talk about the professional development plan and how you tease some of that out. But at the end of the day, if the supervisory alliance is fraught with challenges, that may make this more challenging to have these conversations. Okay, does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense. And I think that if I may chime in also, in my personal experience as the clinical supervisor, director, et cetera, I realized that the modeling from my perspective of those competencies, the knowledge, the skills, and the attitude is imperative also because sometimes the the counselor or the clinician has that difficulty trying to help the other counselor clinician to model certain attitudes. And
Yes.
what happens is they bring it to me, and thanks to the alliance that I have with them, I try to help them to really understand how to model that with their peers and with their colleagues. Because,
Mhm.
in the environment, let's face it, in the OASAS environment, in the clinics, there's a lot of needed improvements in these areas and these competencies. But at the same time, I try to get them to understand that, hey, that is definitely an attitude that your peer has. But what have you sort of exhibited to show and help your peer to understand that, hey, that's a boundary issue? Or hey, that's kind of like a bias that we really don't want to like present not only to staff, but to each other,
Mhm.
right? That kind of stuff, because they look at me and they say, well, he definitely is sticking to this. He definitely is sticking to that. But I want them to understand that it's not me, it's us, it's we have to stick to this, So I don't know if that makes sense, but that's
Mhm.
just something that I was thinking about in terms.
Absolutely does. So it goes back to the many roles that we serve as supervisors, as clinical supervisors, right? Teacher, mentor, coach, modeling. We're doing all of that. And so this is all hopefully coming together as we're talking this through, right? So I'm going to move us forward. Is that okay? I saw a slight head nods. Okay. So now let's make that connection between the competency and the rubrics, right? Competency and the rubrics. So you have your TAP 21, and then you have an additional tool that you can utilize, which is the performance assessment rubric. Okay, and I'm going to go through this, and I'm going to ask for folks to just kind of ground themselves of this is the first time you're seeing this information for some folks. So it's okay if it feels like I need to go through it and process it so that I get it. And so being okay with that, okay? It doesn't mean that you have to get it today. It's like For some folks, I know for me, I have to look at it, touch it, and kind of process it. Okay, so just kind of sitting with that. So the performance assessment rubric, right? So when you look at the performance assessment rubric, you have some key things that you want to look at. One, this is the competency or the area that we're looking at, understanding addiction. And we know that's one of the transdisciplinary foundation areas, right? We have the competency here. So in this particular competency, we have understand a variety of models and theories of addiction and other problems related to substance use. Now, that's the competency that we're looking at that comes under the dimension of understanding addiction. Okay. Now, when you look at this continuum, you have awareness, understanding, applies knowledge, and mastery. Okay. And so when you look under each section, so under awareness, identifies a variety of models and theories of addiction and other problems related to substance use. That's showing awareness. Then we have understanding, which discusses. So we're moving beyond awareness to discusses, has the ability to discuss a variety of models, theories of addiction, and other problems related to substance use. So we have awareness, then we have the ability to discuss it, then the ability to apply it. Okay, so that's the applied knowledge, right? So we have applies knowledge of models and theories of addiction and other substance-related problems to clinical practice, right? So that's the application. And then we have the mastery. So they're using all of these components, uses the knowledge of a variety of models and theories of addiction and other substance-related problems to design interventions and resolve issues in clinical settings, right? Do folks see that continuum? Okay. Now,
that question in terms of C, I think if you could like expand your font a little bigger, because everything looks really small
okay.
as you're showing it to us.
Okay,
I don't know
let's
if you
see. I don't think I can expand the font a little bigger, but if you go into the assessment rubrics,
okay.
you'll see this.
Oh, okay. Because you could probably go into your all right, I'll go into the other thing. No problem.
Okay. So then what you're seeing is the supervisor's rating of this, 1, 2, 3, and 4, or the counselor's rating of it. Okay, so let's say, for example, you're working with a counselor around understanding addiction dimension, and you're looking at this particular competency. You might rate the person as having awareness, but they may rate themselves as having an understanding. Okay, and the consensus in what you're leaning into is the consensus of what you're going to be working on. So this particular space here, like under awareness, this shows awareness, under understanding, this shows understanding, etc. This is the measurable component that you're able to work with your staff around. Okay, does that make sense to folk? Okay, so you're not, so it's very clear about where this is coming from. This is not something that is anecdotal. It's not something that is, you know, it looks different for everybody. Using this tool gives you a real resource. And how do you have this conversation with your supervisees? Okay. Any questions about any of this? This is also located in your participant workbook as well. Okay. Again, being kind to yourself that this is the first time you may be seeing this information. And so just kind of processing it through. Now, the competencies that you're seeing on the performance rubrics come from the TAP 21. Okay, they're not different competencies. They come from the TAP 21. So you're using the TAP 21 and the performance of assessment rubric in conjunction with each other. Okay, so the TAP 21 gives you the knowledge, the skills, and the attitudes, and you are measuring that along this continuum in the performance assessment rubrics. Okay, so when we do the example, when you're connecting the two, you will notice that you're using both in conjunction. Okay, so going back to this here, this is connected to this. Okay, so you now have two resources that you can utilize in assessing performance. Okay, now this information is also going to be helpful to you as you put together your professional development plan that we're going to talk about later. Okay. All right. Now, when you look at the back, or when you go to the back of the rubrics, you will see scoring sheets, right? And basically what this is just putting the competencies in a very user-friendly way and what was the overall rating. Okay, so for example, the practice dimension is clinical evaluation. The element 1 is screening. You'll see a competency here, which is competency number 24. What was the rating? Was it 1, 2, 3, or 4? Okay, this is just a shortened version of how you would put together your performance rubrics. Okay, again, this is just an introduction, so just kind of take your time and process it. Okay. So if we look at this particular starred one, this is the competency, the rating. Okay. So this is another competency that we're looking at. So element 1, screening. And again, here's the competency in the gray. Here's the awareness, the application, competency, mastery. Language looks a little different, but these are the areas that we're looking at. And this is the rating. Okay. Now, while I am showing this on the slide deck, this feels very like, oh, I'm not sure. When you look at the material, you'll see it come together. Okay. The other thing I suggest that when we get to the professional development plan, let's say you're working on a particular competency with a counselor or a supervisee, I would strongly suggest that you just pull out the competencies that you're going to be looking at. And you give the supervisee a copy of the competencies, just the copy of the competency, okay? Not pull out the whole rubrics and have that and flipping through it, etc. It's always super helpful to just pull out the competencies that you're going to be looking at and make copies of them. So you can either make copies of just those sections of the rubric, or you can make copies of the competency with the K, S, and A and just have that in a packet together. Okay. Does that make sense to folks?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, because when you're flipping through pages, when you're flipping through pages, it looks confusing to the person that you're sitting with, and you also get confused, especially the first time you use this. So you want to acclimate yourself to both of these assessment resources first, so you feel comfortable in what's in there, the competencies, how you're going to use the rubrics, and pull them all together in a supervision session. Okay, so launching this is going to require you to take a step back and feel comfortable with it first. Okay. All right. So now you're going to get an opportunity to pull this together a little bit. And remember, be kind to yourself because this is the first time that you are doing this. So what you're going to be doing is in your pod, you're going to think of a specific supervisee or counselor, right? Within your pod, you can discuss somebody if someone has a particular supervisee in mind for whom competency 24 has been a challenge, right? And you're going to use the rubric for competency 24 to assess or rate proficiency Use the KSA to break down or to identify issues for improvement and explain your assessment of the counselor's proficiency and competency 24. Tentatively, you're going to propose 1 or 2 learning goals with the supervisee based upon the KSA and summarize your discussion. Okay, you're going to do this as a group versus one in dyads, okay? So you're going to identify 1 supervisee who has some challenges with competency 24. You're going to look at the KSA breakdown, determine which one you're going to be leaning into, explain why you might be leaning into the knowledge or why you might be leaning into skills, etc. And you're going to identify 1 or 2 learning goals to consider based upon the KSA. Okay, is everyone clear on that? Anyone have any questions? Let me just check to make sure. Okay. All right, perfect. So I see people got it. All right. So remember, please be kind to yourself. This is the first time that you're doing this. Okay, and the slide will be posted during your exercise, and you have 15 minutes to do this. Okay.
Okay, I do have a really quick question. Sorry.
Okay.
Dr. Caldwell. So it's page, what is it? Page 39 in the addiction counselor thing, and then it's page 30 for the clinical evaluation, right? Or the rubric assessment. I lost you volume again. What the heck?
Yeah, the KSA is on 39, yes.
Yes.
The
So you-
KSA is on
Mhm.
39,
Mhm.
and then the rubric assessment is on that attachment she sent us separately this morning.
Yes. So what you're doing is you're practicing identifying something that you're going to be leaning into from the KSA, right? Then you're going to go to the performance rubric to competency 24, and then you're going to assess where the person is, and then you're going to summarize how that conversation, right? After you've assessed, identified the learning goals, and you're just going to summarize what that all looks like, okay? Everybody okay? All right. So I'm going to ask for someone from each pod to be prepared to talk us through that, just a short, concise kind of conversation on what this looked like. And remember, be kind to yourself. This is the first time you're seeing this, okay? And the first time that you're utilizing it, okay? So you should see your pods pop up shortly. So I'm going to go through, just process a little bit on how this felt for the first time being introduced to these assessment resources, how it felt trying to connect the two. And we'll kind of go from there, okay? So I'm going to start with pod number 1. What did this look like for you?
I think it was a lot of hecticness. We were all trying to, we felt the time clock. We got caught. The thing kicked us out of the break room in the middle of a conversation. So I was like, right. So I think we definitely felt the time clock on it, and kind of just trying to get it all. We did happen to try, I think eventually, because we did something similar to this in my grad school. So for me personally, it was in terms of not obviously with the TAP and the rubric specifically, but this idea of here's a competency or here's an ideal. How do we break that down into these subcategories and then review them based on a clinician's competency, right? So using a real life example or similar, example from experiences that you have with people and then parlaying that into it, I think that's what we ultimately tried to do. And even though there was a time clock ticking, I think we did okay at breaking that down and reviewing it from a supervisory perspective.
Excellent, excellent. Now I'm going to ask for you to, I'm going to ask for everyone who's reporting out to just hold on to what they did in regards to the goals, etc., because this is more about you practicing using the tools. Okay, more about the practice and you becoming acclimated to it. Okay, so thank you. So for you, for your pod, it was the time crunch and kind of figuring out how to pull this together.
Yes, very much so.
Got it. Thank you. All right, pod number 2.
So it was sort of a process that we found something that we needed a little more time to work on, of course, and at the same time, really how to apply it using the 24, the competency 24 and the rubric system. At some point, we were really having um, some moments of really trying to understand how to apply the number of the rubric system to the actual awareness, initial application, competency, practice, and mastery, and kind of how do we kind of number that? Because from the example that we saw, it was 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And we were saying, so how do we come up with the 1? How do we come up with the 2? How do we come up with 3 in terms of prioritizing that knowledge, skills, and attitude? But we did come up with a case, which was great in terms of working on the attitude, which was identified as one of the KSAs that needed to be worked on, because this particular staff was having what we call an attitude in the workplace in terms of biases towards the clients. And that was an area that that we had come up with, that we needed to work with the staff on. In addition to working with them on that attitude, it was a little complicated in the sense of the person had the awareness piece, the person had the initial application piece, in terms of, demonstrating effective engagement. The person was competent. The person also had some masteries in terms of using rapport and building skills, but the attitude, which was the knowledge, skills, attitude piece on the competence 24 is what we identified what we needed to work on. And then at that point, when we noticed that and we recognized that, we ran out of time.
Okay.
Is that right? Right, Jennifer, Ira? Pretty much, right? So once we started to
Y-
kind of like
yes.
figure it out, we were getting sort of like a good team collaboration. It just, the time just like, no more, ran out on
Yeah.
us. So
Okay.
that's where we were.
So is it okay if I comment?
Absolutely. Please do.
Okay, so in the rubrics, right, when you're looking at the rating, you don't have to rate each area. You only have one rating. So are they
Okay.
at 2 or are they at 3, etc. So you
Okay.
don't have to go through each of the continuum and say, okay, this, and this. It's
Okay.
only one rating.
I give Jennifer credit because I think Jennifer had mentioned that part that we were like overthinking it a little bit. And
Mhm,
I think that's when we started looking at all the ratings. But
mhm.
then we realized at some point that we probably should be looking at maybe just the one that's applicable to
Yes.
the
And so
person.
what you're doing is you're looking at the rubric and you're trying to figure out from your perspective what you've seen, etc. Is this person at awareness? Are they at applied knowledge, etc.? You're doing that component. Then when you're having the discussion with the staff person or the supervisee, they may rate it differently, right? And that's when you use the rubric and those areas, the breakdown, to talk about, okay, can you give me an example of when you're able to discuss this, or when you've been able to demonstrate this, etc. Can you talk me through a little bit about how how did you come to a rating of 3? Okay, that's what that collaboration is. So when you have this conversation around a competency, it's not necessarily a one-time conversation. It could be multiple conversations around it because you're asking folks, you're sharing the information around the competency. What I've done, I have the competency in front of me. The staff person has a competency in front of them, and we go through it together. Where we say, okay, what do you identify as the knowledge, the skills, and the attitudes, right? What you're thinking about this competency, where do you land? And we're having a very collaborative conversation. Okay, so I may have an idea that the person is at a 1, but they may have an idea that they're at 3. And we're talking about that and figuring out what the ultimate conversation is, what the ultimate rating is, and whether or not this is something that we would put on the PDP. Okay, very much like,
I'm
go ahead.
sorry, if I may, and we find the ratings on the rubric system, correct?
Yes.
The 1, 2, and the 3.
Yes.
Okay.
And so you use those descriptives of what a 1 is, what is a 2, what is a 3, right? And again, this is practice. So when we think about it, think about the premise or the parallel process of a treatment plan, right? When we sit down and we work with somebody on a treatment plan, we determine the goal. For the supervisee, it would be the competency. Then we look at, okay, we have our long range goal. Then we try to figure out where are we at right now, right? So you figure out with the client where they're at right now and where do they want to be. So we start with our initial rating, and then we move to the rating that we're hoping folks will get to with the activities such as training, etc. Okay, this will pull itself together when you see the PDP when we lean into that. Okay, but for right now, it feels very much like, oh, okay, trying to figure this out, which is okay. So I hope that was helpful for you.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Yes. And that's why I say don't pull out the whole entire document. Just pull out the competency you're going to be focusing on.
Okay. I'm gonna step away to the bathroom for a moment. Okay.
No worries. Thank you. Pod number 3, how did it go for you?
Like the folks in part number 2, there was a bit of a challenge. For most of the reasons stated by those in part number 2. I tried to introduce a scenario or a case that demonstrated those 4 competencies, but we kind of got a little straight about it, and it became really challenging to understand and apply.
Okay. Is it okay if I comment?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so you remember you have the competency, you're identifying a KSA, and where are they landing? And it doesn't have to be a KSNA, it could be 1. Okay, so really leaning into what are you really leaning into for this particular competency? Are we talking about knowledge? Where are they landing? Are they aware? Are they able to discuss it? Are they able to apply it, etc.? Okay, so you're focusing on 1K or 1A or 1S, right? Focusing on just 1, and that's how you're really keeping that conversation and keeping that goal very, very concise. Okay.
Yeah,
so again, that's helpful because I was with Jesse, and that's where we were struggling. Is the example he gave, this individual had great knowledge, great attitude, the applying of the skill was where this person was struggling.
Yes.
So I think that's where it just looked like so much to be using the rubric, but I'm like, well, if she's doing really well in 1, and like, I guess that's where the translation for us was really difficult.
Right, because someone has, so when we think about the competency, right, it doesn't have to be all of it. It just is one particular area, and you focus on that one particular area.
Okay.
Okay, so if it's a knowledge thing and you figure out, you think about, okay, what knowledge component are we going to focus on? And you just focus on that. Okay?
Okay.
All right. So pod number 4.
I'll jump in. Can you hear me? My audio
Yes, we
is
can hear you.
much today. I found this very challenging. I feel like we were all kind of confused, and it did, like the other pod said, we ran out of time. But listening to all the other pods and their like struggle to understand and use the rubric, it kind of has all clicked now, which I really appreciate. I think I was overcomplicating it, thinking we had to go to multiple competencies, but really it's just very narrow. It's that one competency, that one rubric, one score on each side. And it sounds like if you're doing it with the staff member, the goal might be to, through a discussion, find a way to almost come to the same score on both sides. And that's what I'm hearing, and where this could be really helpful. It's not like coming in and be like, you're a 1 and let's talk about why you're a 1, but having a conversation before filling it out, so you don't get into that like, no, I'm a 4
Yes.
power struggle. So
And that's why I say that's why I'm kind of suggesting that it's super important to share these competencies with folks before you start introducing them. So folks can take a look at them, feel familiar with them. You can process what's the K, the S, the A. You can process all of this. So then when you introduce it, it doesn't feel as overwhelming. Okay. So this is not going to be a one-time thing where, hey, this is what we're going to be doing today. I strongly suggest that you introduce this prior to you initiating it with your staff. Okay. So thank you for that. And I know enough time, it's the first couple of times you use it, it's going to require a great deal of time figuring out where you're landing with which competency you're going to talk about, which, how you're going to rate and all of that. So this is something that is definitely a bit time consuming until you become familiar with both tools.
So
it's
not necessarily like a rating scale as much as just putting their attention onto like areas that we can work on and improve and just grow as a counselor. And it is something that should be gone over with the counselors.
Absolutely. And when we get to the professional development plan, this will all come together.
Got it. This is great. I love it. Just for not only my own knowledge, but yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Okay. And pod number 5.
Okay. We had the same difficulties as everyone else. We went through the whole competencies for 24, the awareness, the initial application, all of that. I didn't know that you don't have to go through all of them, it was kind of, I'm trying, stressful.
Yes.
Stressful. And trying to figure it out. We went back and forth, and of course it wasn't enough time once we finally kind of got a pretty good idea of what we're supposed to be doing. The time was up. So, but I can see where this is going to take a little practice doing and whatnot, because it can be a little tedious and stressful.
And thank you for that. And is it okay if I comment? So that's why I'm making the suggestion. Practice, go through it, feel comfortable with utilizing it, pull out just the competency you're going to be looking at, pull out just the competency on the performance rubrics you're going to be looking at, and keep it very simple and very concise. Are you going to deal with a K? Are you going to deal with an S? Are you going to deal with an A? Sometimes in some competencies, you might deal with something from all 3 areas, right? But it all very much depends upon the supervisee that you're talking about and you're utilizing this with, okay? I can suggest that when you initially roll this out, if you determine you're going to roll it out at your current space, that you try it, you roll it out with all of the staff, and then you do a pilot with one staff person. And you try it with one staff person, and that'll give you some tools on how you can manage it in the, in that real interaction with the staff person. And that you can also get from them, how did they understand the process, how it felt for them to connect what they're doing with a competency, etc. Okay, Jessica.
So if you were to do a K, an A, and an S, would they be on separate rubrics for that person so that if they're working on 3 separate things?
So when you see the professional development plan, it will all come together, because the professional development plan, you're working on one competency, and you could have a K, S, and A, or you can have just an S.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll get to that in a bit, but once, it'll all come together once we do the professional development plan, right? But you don't have to work on a KSA for a competency. You may just identify an A. You may just identify a K. Okay. All right. So the stressfulness is kind of taken out now, because hopefully it's decreased on some level, because now you have a sense of what these tools look like. Okay, and how you're beginning to develop some strategies on how to navigate them. Okay, so we're going to continue leaning into this. And so let me share my screen. So the other thing that we need to consider whenever we're thinking about the developmental component of how we're developing staff in regards to their competency, etc., is we really need to be cognizant of the different learning styles that folks have, right? So you have visual learners, you have auditory learners, and kinesthetic learners, right? And so when you're thinking about a particular goal, a particular task, leaning into a particular competency, this is where that supervisory alliance and that individualized care comes into place, or that individualized knowledge, right? So there's 2 ways you can look at this. You can either ask the supervisee, well, how is the best way that they learn, right? Because for most of us, we can definitely identify, well, I'm a visual learner, or I'm an auditory learner, etc. Or there are a number of tools available that you can utilize to help people suss out what type of learning that they respond to. Okay, so you can do either one of them. But we want to be cognizant that when we're putting together the goals with our staff, right, when we're leaning into those particular goals, the K, the S, and the A, what is that particular staff person's learning style? Okay, so you see some examples here. So visual guided imagery, demonstrations, auditory tapes, reading aloud, kinesthetic experiments, role plays, games, etc. So when folks take a look at this, what do they think is their particular learning style? And you can either unmute or you can put it in the chat. So I'm seeing some folks saying visual, a mixture of visual or kinesthetic. Okay, visual, some kinesthetic. Absolutely. And some of this overlaps, so it's okay. Kinesthetic, yep. Visual, absolutely. And kinesthetic feels like it's a combo of both, right? It could potentially be a combo. I see kinesthetic, yes, visual and auditory, absolutely. And so when you think about the different ways that you learn, it then develops your heightened sense of awareness of how your different supervisees learn. And all of the things that you're engaging in, the activities that you're engaging in, tapping into as many of those learning styles as possible. Okay. So when we think about, again, the whole premise of supervision, and we're coming back full circle, right? Coming back full circle. In, supervision, regardless as to its form, provides focused support. It assesses the counselor's needs, because we're doing that each time we're meeting for supervision, we're assessing, We're continually assessing that. We're facilitating outcome-oriented planning. We're recommending treatment opportunities and assisting in developing a career ladder. Okay, that's really intensely tailored supervision. And so whether you're doing this, whether it's through peer or individual, etc., these are some of the main goals that you're leaning into in regards to tailoring that supervision to meet your supervisee's needs. Okay. So now we're going to move into module 6. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to open it up and ask where folks are landing. Do you feel like you need a break now, or do you would like to move into module 6? See what I'm getting in the chat. So what I'm going to do, oh, wait a minute. Break. Okay, I'm seeing, okay, break. I'm good either way. Break. Okay, so it looks like the breaks have it. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a 10-minute break, come back, woosah, ground yourself, and then we're going to head right into module 6. Okay, so we're going to take 10 minutes. All right, so we're going to jump back into our material, and you are going to get another opportunity to do some practice or actually practice using the assessment rubrics and the competencies, okay? So we're now moving into performance evaluation. I'm going to share my screen. Performance evaluation. Now, we've been talking about the performance evaluation throughout our time, anecdotally or connected to other things, connected to why we are assessing, etc. Our last module, we looked at some assessment resources that we can utilize, but when we think about clinical supervision, right, while we are providing consistent supervision, we are doing that under the thought process that, one, we're providing, of course, teaching, coaching, mentoring opportunities, etc. But we are also, conducting a very important function, which is performance evaluation. Okay. So we've covered thus far the definition and roles, right? Our, definition of clinical supervision roles. Began the process of developing a personal theory, leaned into the premise that in order to support any work that we're doing with our supervisees, that we need to really attend to consistently that supervisory alliance and the parallel process between the supervisory alliance and the therapeutic alliance we have with clients. We've leaned into modalities and methods. We talked about and leaned into assessment resources. And now we're going to talk about how we're pulling all of this together, how it's all connected to the performance evaluation. So the learning objectives for this particular module are identify the importance of the performance evaluation, list a number of methods for monitoring job performance, providing performance-based feedback. Now, when we talk about providing feedback, we want to be very thoughtful even then to the language that we're utilizing. We're providing performance-based feedback, constructive feedback, etc. And the way that we utilize that language helps to also lend itself to the way that our supervisees will perceive that feedback, right? We want to lean into that strength-based perspective. So constructive feedback is very different and a shift from constructive criticism. Okay, because when we hear that, what's the first thing we pay attention to? Criticism, right? So we want to set the stage for that. We also want to structure supervisory interviews to be the most beneficial. So the supervisory interviews, while we're calling it supervisory interviews, we're talking about the supervision sessions themselves, right? So we know that there are some places and spaces that have very structured supervision, structured notes, etc. And you may be in a space that has that. You may also be in a space that does not have a structured supervision note and how you document, etc. So these are some of the key things you want to think about if you need to create your own notes. So The role of performance evaluation is to assess job performance and professional development within the context of a supportive alliance. If we have a supportive supervisory alliance, we're then able to provide feedback, conduct coaching, do the teaching, etc., within the context of that. That alliance is something that is present in all of our supervision, right? If we have that healthy, supportive alliance, supervision happens in a way that is healthy and is beneficial for both folks involved, okay? In the context of that supervisory or that context of that supportive alliance, we're linking performance with criteria and evaluation methods, right? So when we're talking about a particular challenge a supervisor may be having, and you notice I'm using the word challenge, we're able to link it to competencies that are evidence-based, that are measurable. We're able to then lean into how do we assess their level of competency. What area of the competency are we looking at? And then developing a plan in collaboration with the supervisee on how to increase their level of competency in this area, okay? So we're engaging supervisees in continuous learning, okay? None of our supervisees, including ourselves, have got this down pat. So we're all learning and growing, etc. So when we talk about the whole premise of professional development, we're really leaning into how can we increase folks' learning opportunities and how we can increase their level of competence no matter where they go. It also leans into assuring that the agency mission, quality of care, and client safety is always present. It's something that's always within the context of what we're talking about, and that we're able to assess whether or not that's happening, right? Because that's also part of our responsibilities to make sure that the mission is being upheld, that quality of care is being provided, and that clients feel safe. And when we talk about safety, not just physical safety, emotional safety, etc. Okay, so this is the role of performance evaluation. This is really getting a sense of all of that. So each organization has a performance evaluation form. Different folks have different ways that they evaluate. So one of the key things I'd like for you to think about is that's why it's important for folks to know what their job description is, because that is the evaluation component, right? Are they able to meet the requirements of their particular position? So we start with folks being very clear of what their position entails. And then we're able to utilize that with continuous supervision, professional learning opportunities, and then we're able to pull that all together for the performance evaluation. Okay. So this is another opportunity for you to practice. So I'd like for you to go to page 50 and you're going to read the case study of Megan. And you're going to identify concerns about the interview, what merits positive feedback, okay? And what strategy might foster professional development within the counselor, and on what would you focus on providing performance-based feedback, okay? So this is Megan, okay? Megan and her interaction with Tony. And this is on page 50. And I'm hearing, you know, just being respectful of what I heard in regards to time. Instead of 15 minutes, we'll give you 20 minutes for this, okay? And just stay focused on the particular questions that you're being asked in your pods. And I'm going to ask for someone to be prepared to play back their conversation in the larger room, okay? So you're going to be given 20 minutes for this particular exercise, and you're focusing on the case study of Megan and her interaction with Tony, okay? That's on page 50. Your pod should be coming up shortly. Okay, there you go. See you in 20 minutes. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome back. So what I'm going to ask for each pod to do is to just, first of all, everyone just take a breath. Just a deep breath and just stretch a little bit because we're getting a lot done. And it's a lot of information to take in, a lot of new things to hear, process how you're going to utilize them, etc. So just taking that breath and rolling your shoulders, whatever it is you need to do. So let's now go into the case study with Megan and Tony. And I'm going to ask for you to sit with that because you're going to see Megan and Tony again. Okay, so that's your working case study for the rest of the day. Okay, that we're together. So I'm going to go through each pod and ask you to process the case study. So I'm going to share my slide again so that you can see the questions. Okay. You were asked to, first of all, does everybody see the slide deck? See the slide? Yes? Okay, awesome. So you were asked to, in your pods, read the case study, identify the concerns about the interview, note what merits feedback, what merits positive feedback, what strategy might foster professional development within the counselor, and on what would you focus performance-based feedback. Okay, so let's start with pod number 5. Would you like to share?
You said part 5?
Yes, I sure did. Changing it up.
When we read the case study, do I need to read the case study?
No, you don't need to read the case study. You could just process the questions.
Okay, so pretty much we thought the same way as the supervisor who felt like she started out well, but I think when the question came up about what the client goal was, she kind of fumbled there. And I think we tried to kind of break it down to where she could have helped the client understand by using motivational interviewing skills, some person-centered skills like, parenting or reflective listening, so that it would have helped. And then we also talked about maybe helping the counselor get more resources. Because sometimes when we are in, or when we see clients come in and they have some ambivalence, more so there is some things like their basic needs not being met. So I think with the client, he was struggling with the medication and how his mom didn't help him. So she could have probably helped him there. So we also thought about in helping her understanding this was by role playing so that she can get an idea how to help during the next session if he decided to come in. Shanasia, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think what had happened was as soon as Tony could see that Megan the counselor was uncertain, and on top of that he was triggered about the fact that his mother couldn't pay for his medication. So once he saw that Megan was uncertain, he already made up in his mind that he wasn't going to come back. And then as a counselor you're supposed to always, have it start at least a treatment plan. So she didn't do any of that. So in his mind, he's not going to come back. Because to be honest with you, I see from Tony's perspective, having a drug issue that he did admit, and he is looking for help. However, I don't think he's thinking about the future. I think he's thinking about now. How can you help me now? And there was a disconnect on Megan's side, and he saw that, so he's not going to come back.
And what did your pod identify as positive feedback?
The fact that her initially her the interview, how the interview started out, the rapport and whatnot, the positive rapport initially, that is something that deserves some positive feedback. Also, the fact that she scheduled him for another appointment for the following week without any type of plan, like she was saying that she didn't develop any type of treatment plan. He should have left with some type of, whether he followed it or not, he should have left with some type of plan for that week. That he wasn't up until the next appointment.
Okay. And so what strategies might, did your pod kind of identify to foster professional development with Megan?
Strength-based focus support, identifying his strengths, and then building from there.
So when you think about the concerns that you had about the interview, the conversation, right? How would you support Megan in regards to those concerns? So you mentioned that you felt like she should have done a treatment plan. There were a number of things you kind of mentioned under that umbrella. And so how would you support her to foster that ongoing?
I'm gonna answer. It might be wrong, but I'm just gonna do it anyway. If I was Megan's supervisor, I would ask her to focus on affirming and then going into strengths. And then that would, I guess Tony would, kind of breathe and that's when he would want to figure out like his future and what he can do as a next step for me.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. So once everyone gets finished, I'm going to pull out some things for folk, okay? Right. So pod number 4, thank you, pod 5. Pod number 4, would you like to share what your conversation looked like in regards to processing this case study?
I'll jump in. I'm chatty today. So for the concerns, right, the concerns of Tony are that, of course, he has a substance use disorder that he's seeking treatment for. He has a complicated medical condition and he doesn't have benefits and he may become unhoused soon. But Megan is our focus and she had a challenging time with engaging him. Well, good things. She developed rapport and got him to open up about his substance use very easily. So that's fantastic, and acknowledge that it's actually an issue he wants to work on. Challenges for Megan, though, were her inability to kind of identify what stage of change he was in and engage him with motivational interviewing to try to encourage him to start to develop a treatment plan or to develop anything, any plan for the next week. And I think that would be the area that she would need to focus on for professional development. And we looked through, we tried to use the competencies and we found 76 and 77, which focus on those 2 issues. And that's what we would do. That's it.
Awesome, thank you. And is it okay for me to comment?
Yeah, please.
It's great that you guys were able to lean into the competencies, because that's the formation of how, that's your structure and how you're going to lean into the professional development piece. What are the competencies? And we know with this particular case study, this is potentially screening and assessment. You can pull a competency from any of those dimensions, right? Okay, awesome. So let's go to pod number 3.
I honestly, we kind of mirrored a lot of what was said already. We did look at the competencies to kind of see which one we would focus on too. And we kind of looked at like what resources might be available for Megan to pull out. We talked about harm reduction and how like there was no mention of MAT or Narcan or anything like that. And I also was thinking like in terms of the treatment plan, I think that's usually like just a box that needs to be checked for all of us when providing treatment, and we can get stuck in that. But it would have been really important to kind of think of like a short-term goal for Tony over that week to kind of instill hope that like there's a possibility, because he was really identifying like the only positive thing is from shooting dope, and that can become dangerous very quickly. So that was kind of where we identified like something. But again, we agreed with everybody in terms of like building rapport is great. Even just getting him to open up about his substance use was great. But that there really was no bridge from the week, you know, to get him to show up next week and like give him a little bit of hope, you know, and help pull that out of him on, you know, what can be a plan, what's a short-term goal for the next week, just to kind of hold that engagement a little bit.
Thank you. Pod number 2.
We were noticing a lot of the same things, with concerns, you know, being that there really was no plan after the session. We thought that she did a great job of building rapport, establishing safety. You know, he was able to be honest with her. Strategies for fostering professional development, we were talking about, it was hard to not get into clinician or, you know, counselor sort of mode with this and talk about what we would do, but it did kind of make us think like, okay, so if I'm assuming Megan might be relatively new to the field, then I might use an integrated approach and do some potentially some teaching. And you know, how do you work with a client who is really having difficulty seeing a life other than the life that they currently have, and just getting angry at the thought of doing anything different, or being, you know, being reluctant. So, you know, working on some motivational interviewing skills, solution focus, and then absolutely doing some harm reduction. And how can we increase safety with this client in the interim until they're able to move from pre-contemplation to contemplation.
Awesome. Pod number 1.
Yes, I don't know if we can provide much more. The previous groups did a great job of kind of touching a lot of the bases. I guess the things that I would point out that we discussed primarily was the concern that you just leave someone who's at that seemingly pre-contemplative stage, or at least contemplative at best, without a plan. Here's a week, we'll see you in there, go see what happens, letting them leave the assessment without something to do in the interim between that was concerning. But the positive feedback would be they seem to establish rapport really well with the person quickly, so that's always a plus. Professional development, we hung our hat on the lack of what seemed to be the lack of motivational interview expertise from Megan, right? Like I think we use the euphemism of it kind of seemed like she came in with a game plan. Okay, we're going to do this, and I'm comfortable establishing rapport with Tony, and we'll have the discussion. But when things kind of took a left, whether it's due to like a subconscious trigger about mom or something, and the conversation ended up being more combative or at least challenging, it seemed like she didn't know what to do. And so being able to kind of, you know, as MI puts it, roll with the resistance and develop that kind of conversational skills and techniques that allow you to get the things you need for the assessment and develop the treatment plan and touch base on those pieces. Change your strategy. That would be something we would work on professionally. And then performance-wise, is being able to utilize multiple techniques and skills in order to get what you need done and ensure the client's safety, right? Because again, it's not about necessarily him walking out the door and we'll never touch a drop of alcohol or shoot dopa again. It's about making sure that he's got a plan of at least success and from a harm reduction standpoint, safety.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. So just to process and bring this full circle, some potential items of concern, et cetera, with this particular case is one, of course, the planning component, any treatment planning not being present. Two, the potential to assess for a crisis, to see where Tony is, if the children were safe, et cetera. Those are potential areas to continue to assess. Also, as folks mentioned, where Tony is landing in regards to his stages of change, et cetera. Those are things that you could potentially identify as areas of concern. What I want to bring folk to is something that was mentioned by someone, I think it was pod 3. What were our expectations of what we would do versus what Megan did, right? And we really want to be very thoughtful about that, because when we are processing with folk a particular challenge that they may be having with a client or with a particular case, taking a step back and thinking about, okay, who is this person who I'm working with? Is this someone who's relatively new? Is this someone who knows the policies and procedures? Is it someone who would know how to, do the treatment planning, et cetera? There are a number of different areas that, while we might feel like, hey, we know to do that, we want to check in to see if the supervisee has these knowledge, the skills, or the attitude to do these things, right? So you're already thinking about the competency, and you're thinking about the competency as the supervisee is manifesting it, right? I mean, that definitely comes in. We have certain expectations, and the expectations are tied to our prior experience, but it's also tied to the requirements of the position, et cetera. And there's room to kind of suss that out, but we want to be thoughtful about our expectations of what we do may not necessarily be where that particular staff person is, or that supervisee is at that particular time. So we want to manage that process. What merits positive feedback is the fact that Megan built a therapeutic rapport, or built a rapport with Tony fairly quickly and got a lot of information. Okay, a lot of information, which this is the first time she's seeing Tony. So she's getting all of this information. So that development of a rapport is really something that merits positive feedback. The professional development, what strategies we might use, we can use some training, we can do some peer supervision, some shadowing, some other opportunities for her to develop the skills that we're looking for in regards to treatment planning, in regards to assessing a potential crisis. Even one of the things you might want to think about is when Megan potentially may have felt overwhelmed by all of the things that Tony was saying, before Tony left, could she have checked in with a supervisor? Right? There's all of these different things. And on what would you provide performance-based feedback? Any of those areas. Okay, so leaning into this in a very kind of thoughtful way is setting the stage for how we're now going to move into performance evaluation and into the PDP. Okay, so some supervisory methods are direct observation, individual or tutorial or group. And we want to remind ourselves of that, because depending upon the challenges or the connection between the competencies and where folks are landing versus where we're hoping they are, or where they should be in regards to meeting the expectations of the mission, the agency mission, client care, et cetera. We want to be very thoughtful that we provide those opportunities of direct observation, right? So are we seeing this? So once we do the kind of coaching with Megan, are we then seeing her implement that feedback? Okay. Are we teaching her the things that she may need to have an increased level of knowledge around? And is it possible in a group or in a group setting that we can talk through assessment, the identification of crises, the importance of service planning, etc. There are a lot of opportunities here. Okay, so we want to make sure that we lean into all of them in regards to folks that we're working with. So the resources that you were able to utilize for some of this is the performance assessment rubric. And if we're focusing specifically on an evidence-based practice, that we are utilizing fidelity measures, right? So we have to circle back. So when we talk about, folks mentioned mental motivational interviewing, right? When we talk about motivational interviewing, is the person able to implement those motivational interviewing skills? Okay, so would this be an opportunity for a training or training opportunities ongoing around motivational interviewing and seeing if people are actually being effective with motivational interviewing? Because one thing to talk about motivational interviewing and that we're doing it, but how are you actually demonstrating motivational interviewing? Okay, how are you integrating it into the work? So when we talk about things like motivational interviewing, CBT, we don't want to talk about it kind of globally. We want to be able to assess the use of it, right? Assess the use of it. So we may use an established fidelity scale, or we can modify one that's established, or we can identify agency-based performance indicators. So for example, there are some folks who work for organizations where motivational interviewing is the evidence-based practice that they utilize, right? I've worked with some organizations that says CBT is the evidence-based practice. So that might be the preferred evidence-based practice, but how are we making sure that it's implemented and it's something that's embedded in all of the work that we're doing? So it's just kind of food for thought around this. So we say evidence using motivational interviewing. How would we know Megan is using motivational interviewing effectively? Okay. Any questions about any of that?
I just had a comment. Would we know whether Megan is using MI or CBT through changes in the client's behavior and attitude, and just the progress notes that she writes?
It could be the progress notes. It would be direct observation of seeing her actually demonstrate the skills. All of that is potential opportunities.
Gotcha.
Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome. So the levels of fidelity assessment include addressing whether structure, procedures, and routines are in place, right? So remember when I mentioned with Megan, did Megan know, or did Megan recognize that potentially there was a procedure in place if she was in a situation where she was unsure of what her next move could be? Could she have access to a supervisor? Could she have access to a peer who could come in to assist, right? So that's one of the pieces we might want to look at. Practitioner, from a fidelity assessment, addresses whether the practitioner is delivering services consistent with the program. So if we're talking about MI, if that is a preferred practice within the program, is Megan using it and consistent with the program expectation around motivational interviewing? And also with the client, addresses whether the client is receiving the services within the practice framework. So we have, is Megan actually implementing MI? Is she using it in the process of assessment, etc.? We can see that in her documentation or direct observation. And we're also getting a sense of whether the client is responding to this as well. Okay, so you're including all of this in your fidelity assessment. Okay, so when we talk about leaning into a particular approach that might be helpful for a practitioner, are we looking at it from all aspects? Okay. We're going to reconsider the case of Tony and his counselor, Megan. Okay, so you've identified on what issues you would consider giving Megan feedback, right? The positive and the challenging ones. So now what I'm going to ask you to do is you're going to get another opportunity to practice your rubrics. So under the practice dimensions 1 and 2 in the rubrics document, and then remember the dimensions are at the top, I'm going to ask you to identify one competency. And you started doing some of this already in your initial conversations, which could be targeted for Megan's professional development, right? So you're circling back and going into those competencies, and you're identifying one that you're going to be leaning into for the purpose of Megan's case study. Okay, is everyone clear about what they're doing? I think so. I think I see some head nods. Let me just check through. Anyone have any questions? No?
I do, sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
I think it would be helpful for me to know what page in the rubric to go to.
Dimensions 1 and 2. Hold on a second. Let me go into the performance rubric. Hold on. Let me stop my share. All you have to do is look from page 30 on, and you'll develop something from either, you'll pick one competency from either practice dimension 1 or practice dimension 2. And the practice dimensions we're looking at are clinical evaluation and treatment planning. So you're going to pick one competency from there, and that's what you're going to use for Megan.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So we're going to do, I think we could do, let's do 15 minutes for this, because I think some of the groups, some of the pods already began this process already. Okay. All right. So let's see, are we ready? And looks like we're ready. Okay. See you in 15. Okay, folks. So I'm going to ask 2 pods to report out on how this exercise went, just 2, okay? So I am going to choose, let's see, pod number 3. How did the exercise go?
I think we definitely found different ones that could be helpful. I think it's figuring out like prioritizing which one to focus on. But overall, we kind of landed on competency 36, so document assessment findings and treatment recommendations. So we thought that'd be helpful in terms of where under awareness, it says is aware of agency assessment protocols, procedures, and documentation standards. Just because we were concerned about like
I'm sorry, is that Jessica? Because you're going in and out.
reduction offering,
Yeah, we can't hear you,
Narcan,
Jessica.
knowing
Jessica?
different levels of treatment options and Oh
Jessica,
no, I'm sorry, my internet is going in and out.
that's okay. We heard part of what you said. You want to lean into it? Oh, it's going in and out. Okay. So would somebody like to support Jessica from pod number 3?
So we did practice dimension 2, and we chose competency number 43, which was to formulate mutually agreed on and measurable treatment goals and objectives. And we thought that Megan did not do a good job in this. Maybe I should reframe. Megan was limited in her ability to obtain enough information to complete a treatment plan. And we thought that as supervisors supervising Megan, we will probably highlight to her the importance of maybe improving her motivational interviewing skills and being able to work in collaboration with Tony to more or less I guess explore some areas in the family life area, because he did mention stuff about his mom, but I think that if she was able to utilize maybe some open-ended questions, or shifting the conversation from his mom, or exploring maybe if whether or not he has a friend who is supportive or a sibling who is supportive, that could have shifted the energy of the conversation, and she would have been better able to obtain some information to create or come up with an objective or a goal in that family life area of the treatment plan. We also thought that it might be helpful to explore the importance of effective time management, especially when we're working with caseloads of a lot of clients. It can be challenging to just have conversations without documenting, and maybe utilizing effective documentations during assessments can be helpful when it comes to completing a treatment plan. We also thought that Megan could have been more able to suss out more information in the family life area. We're only focusing on the family life area because that's the only one that she actually got some information from him to address. If she had also reframe or try to figure out the triggers around the family life area, and that would have given her some means of creating at least one goal and objective that he can possibly focus on during treatment, and maybe provide some insight for the follow-up appointment with her. So those are the things that we kind of identified, and then time went out on us. But I'm excited to hear what other people might present.
Mhm. Excellent. That sounds like a very robust conversation because it was thoughtful around this was the competency. So you leaned into the practice dimension. What was the competency? And then you subsequently made the case for the competency, leaning into the positive and the challenging. And that discussion that you just kind of related is very much how the discussion may happen in your discussion with the supervisee, right? We want to be very thoughtful about the language, but we're leaning into, this is the competency that we're leaning into, right? And then assessing where the supervisee falls along. Is it awareness? Is it knowledge, et cetera? And kind of leaning into it in that way. The other thing I wanted to circle back to Jessica is when there was the priority. So when you're working with a supervisee, there may be any number of competencies that you can potentially focus on, right? Any number of competencies. And in many ways, a lot of the competencies overlap. Okay, so leaning into that is also equally important as well. Even though you may have 2 or 3 competencies that overlap, which one is the goodness of fit for the conversation and the professional development opportunities? Okay, so once we get to the PDP, you'll recognize that you use one competency. So you're leaning into the goodness of fit and then kind of going from there. Okay. Jessica, were you able to come back in?
I'm hoping you guys, I'm able to hear all of you, but it does say my internet's unstable. So I'm hoping you can.
We can hear you so clear right now.
Okay.
Okay.
I think we had talked about competency 36 and 40, but again, in terms of priority, like were we assessing just that first initial appointment, or were we looking at like how important it is in your next one to do, X, Y, and Z? Because we thought of like appropriate level of care for this person who's identifying that like his only positive thing in his life is using, and that like housing might become an issue. So there's a lot of like different risk factors that play into that situation. So we just kind of kept going back and forth on like, which one do we prioritize?
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. So I'm going to move us forward because we still have some material to cover, and I definitely want to spend a little bit of time on the PDP and preparing you for the assignment that you will have for the remainder of the time in regards to meeting your hour requirement. So I'm going to share my screen. Some key things that we want to remind ourselves of when we are talking about performance-based or performance evaluative or performance feedback basic concepts are, one, we want to be very super thoughtful about the feedback that we're giving, kind of thinking about it before we give it. So the supervisor's interpretation of behavior are influenced by our own assumptions. And we saw that when folks initially, the first exercise talked about Megan and what were some of the opportunities to give feedback, like what would I do, right? So it's influenced by your own assumptions. But you really want to kind of get a sense of, yes, you can manage those assumptions. And what does that look like? Is it connected to the competency or the expected level of competency, et cetera? And you're making clear statements of these assumptions and keying them in so that the supervisee understands. So for example, if you're talking about the documentation, the expectation is this, the assumption is this. How do we pull that together so that Megan would understand that documentation is an important aspect of this. You're also sharing and comparing expectations, right? So when you are explaining those expectations, when you're leaning into that and you're providing the feedback, when that person is able to share and compare, or when they're able to do the playback, it signals that there's actual collaboration happening. We want to be very thoughtful in giving feedback, that we have an intention in why we're giving the feedback, but what is the impact on the individual? So we really want to be very thoughtful about that. And so we want to be thoughtful about feedback, period, making sure that it's crafted thoughtfully. Because if you use certain language or you use particular language, that can kind of set or take away from the message, which is the intention around the feedback. What we're meant to do is give performance-based feedback, okay? And really being thoughtful and carefully crafting it. We also want to verify that there's a mutual understanding. And so one of the ways you can do that is a playback. I just wanted to check in to see what you heard, or just kind of get a sense of what your takeaway from this, et cetera. Those are kind of very casual ways of finding out whether or not folks understand what is being discussed, okay? So feedback is an overt response, verbal and nonverbal, that gives specific and subjective information about how a person's behavior in a particular situation affects someone or something, right? So we want to be thoughtful about what feedback is. So the objective of feedback, particularly professionally based feedback or performance-based feedback, professional is in my brain, but performance-based feedback, is to transmit reliable information so that a person receive it can establish what we call a database for which to change their behavior if they choose to do so. You can provide a great deal of performance-based feedback, but the person hopefully receives it and then is able to implement it, okay? Implement it, and you assess whether they implemented it through direct observation. So one model that you can lean into is the oral feedback model: observe, report, assumption, and level. And so some examples are when I saw, or I heard, or I assume, or my reaction was. And there's so many other examples that you could potentially think about in regards to this. Okay, so what you're doing is you're starting, when you're getting ready to share feedback, is starting by asking permission to share the feedback. Is it okay if I provide some feedback? Is it okay if I piggyback on that, etc.? You've seen that modeled throughout the time that we've had together. Request a playback of the message. Can you give me a sense of what were your takeaways from that, etc.? And you're confirming mutual understanding after an accurate playback. When someone or a supervisee does the playback, it provides you an opportunity to make any corrections or to reframe anything that potentially may not have been understood, etc., or that was not your intention to communicate. So the whole oral process is really about asking permission. Is it okay for me to give you some feedback? Okay for me to piggyback on that? Talk about what was observed, relate the assumptions about the situation, share feelings and concerns, report the impact of the behavior in question, right? Request a playback of the feedback, clarify any misunderstandings or omission, and confirm mutual understanding. In the supervisory session, when you're providing feedback, you want to make sure if there's any challenges around that, whether there was something that was not communicated, folks are unclear, etc., that you want to address that before the end of the supervision so that people are operating and forming their database based upon accurate information, okay? So when you think about the oral model and you think about how important is playback, how might this skill impact the relationship between the supervisor and the supervisee, the way that you give feedback? Okay, any thoughts about that?
I think it would just create a two-way street for the conversation and kind of contribute to an environment of respect where either party can shut down the conversation if it's not the right time for that person. And I think having that, giving a supervisee that power is really important.
Is it okay if I comment additionally?
Please.
It also helps to support the supervisory alliance, right? Because part of that alliance is also empowering our supervisees to feel like they have a sense of authority in that space and that they can actually be active. And there's bi-directional feedback, bi-directional conversation. It's not just you providing the feedback. The supervisee has an opportunity to respond to that feedback or to ask questions and feel comfortable in asking those questions. Okay, so there's a sense of mutual understanding of where we are going from here. Okay. Other folks, what are their thoughts around that? How important is the playback and how might this skill impact the relationship?
I think the playback is super important because I've done it myself where my supervisor is like, all right, so you get what, where to go from here. And I'm like, yep. And then I leave there and I have no idea because my mind was in 30,000 other places where they use the language that I'm like, oh, I should know this. So I feel like embarrassed to ask them to explain that acronym or whatever it was. So I think the playback piece and allowing somebody to feel comfortable with giving their playback or asking questions or saying like, no, I don't understand what to do next is really, really important.
Absolutely. Thank you. I saw a couple of people raise their hands, but it flashed pretty quickly. So please feel free to unmute yourself.
I notice here like it's gonna create some positive interaction with supervisor and supervisee when you reuse the playback. And it's very important and create some safe space to talk more.
I just wanted to indicate that we heard part of what you said, but if you feel comfortable, can you type it in the chat so we can make sure that we capture everything that you were mentioning? Okay. Thank you. Felix?
Yeah, I think the value of the oral model is extremely important because it supports the importance of a dialogue that should be happening constantly. There should never be this moment of just, steady quietness, and silence. And when you're meeting with, your person that you're working collaboratively with, I think there should be a dialogue. It creates an open platform to talk about whatever it is that person wants to talk about also. And in terms of the importance of the playback, I just like to be clear that the playback is not just something that I'm playing back, but it's something that you want to give also the counselor or the supervisee a moment to play back what their thoughts are on what you guys are discussing, what their thoughts and ideas are on how to move forward with the plan or the competency or whatever it is that you're discussing, because that helps build the alignment also. And I think that's the impact of it, building the alignment and giving them the autonomy to speak about what it is that they think works, but also giving you, the supervisor, also the alignment and the understanding of what it is that they're really getting and what it is they're not getting and what it is they really need help with. And just kind of like just scaling back and just letting them also speak about what it is from their perspective and what works for them. Because ideally, anything that's going to work has to come from them also, in terms of their buy-in and in terms of their understanding on what it is that you're trying to help them understand that they need to work on as well. So it most certainly can, impact the relationship between the supervisor and supervisee. But I just have to throw this one in also, is that sometimes, depending on the supervisee that you're working with, you're going to find that there is a level of some kind of tangible communication when you give them that leverage to be able to speak about anything, whether it's the work, whether it's the documentation, whether it's the competency in terms of treatment planning, competency versus screening, whatever it is. When you give the supervisee sometimes that platform to speak about certain things, sometimes they take it in the context of trying to tell you how you're supposed to be doing this stuff now. And I want to make it quite clear that when we're in a supervisory position, it's an alignment and we're working with them, but at some point we have to also sort of establish the staple of you being the supervisor also in this alignment, right? And there are certain things that you're going to have to say and certain things that you're going to have to stick to, in this alignment. So that's all I was thinking.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And just to comment, because I think you gave me a blanket, it's okay for me to comment.
We set that disclaimer a long time ago. Yep.
It is important that while you're in the midst of all of this, that there is, yes, you have a supervisory alliance. Yes, you're attending to that. Yes, this is a relationship between you and the supervisee, right? That there is very clear roles within this relationship, that there are things that you as a supervisor will have to do. Okay, and so being very thoughtful about that is incredibly important. Okay, I'm going to check the chat because I want to make sure. Okay, so just following up on Mirel, who mentioned that I think the oral model would create positive connection and create a safe space to talk. Absolutely. Absolutely. The thing about the oral model and really sussing it through is that even if there is silence in the space, right? Let's say it's silence in the space, the supervisee hopefully feels comfortable enough to say, hey, I heard what you said. I'm just processing it for a minute. They can even say, hey, is it okay if I circle back to you because I just want to think about this? That's all connected to the supervisory alliance that you have, right? Because some folks are processors. They may not be able to respond to it at that particular time, but they're able to circle back and say, hey, I was thinking about what we were talking about last week, or in your next supervision session, you can say, I just wanted to circle back on something we talked about last week. What were your thoughts on it? Because you mentioned you needed to process it, right? So that connection between supervisions is the same parallel process as the connection between when we work with clients. You should see that golden thread in the documentation. So in the supervision, you should also see that thread as well of the things that you've been talking about, the things that you've been working on, etc. Okay. And so speaking about supervision, supervision is really in itself a structured space, a structured area where, oh, I jumped ahead, a structured area where communication, a structured communication process with a clearly definable purpose. Folks are coming in to speak with you and you're conducting a supervision, enabling the counselor to improve their job performance. And so it creates an atmosphere and provides a structure which facilitates, again, you've heard me say that a number of times, bi-directional feedback. It provides a space for teaching, learning, and evaluation, and improves the quality, or hopefully improves the quality of the effectiveness of client services. And it's an opportunity. The focus is really developing the supervisee's knowledge, skills, and professional attitudes. Okay, so this is why it's important for us to have consistent supervision with folk. Okay, because we can't really provide that consistent opportunity for teaching and learning and evaluation unless we are having consistent supervision, whatever form that it takes. Okay, so some things that we need to be cognizant of when we're thinking about a supervisory session, whether it is individual, whether it's group, etc., is one, setting an agenda. Okay, setting an agenda. One of the ways that I've kind of done this in the past is I have kind of my set agenda, which may be focused on something we discussed in a prior supervision. I also send something, I would send an email maybe 24 hours before, saying, is there anything you'd like to add to the agenda for supervision? Okay, so that way, if there was any information that I needed to gather, etc., I had it in front of me. So setting the agenda provides structure, it decreases anxiety, and it fosters trust, right? Because each person, particularly the supervisee, understands what is going to be discussed in that supervision session. So you establish an agenda, it helps to prioritize things, and also you set a time frame, right? Set a time frame in which the meeting is going to happen. Step two is you're giving feedback throughout the opportunity or the supervision. So you're empowering and you're individualizing the supervision as you're providing that supervision session, right? You're individualizing it in a way that is really focused and tailored to that interaction. And one of the ways that you can lean into giving feedback is the oral model, asking permission, doing the playback, etc. You also, depending upon what's happening in that supervision, have opportunities to teach and negotiate. So you're confirming understanding, you're negotiating objectives, and you use some really important tools, the motivational skills, active listening, and paraphrasing. And so all of this is a part of that process. And then lastly, you're securing commitment, right? You're determining willingness, you're clarifying expectations, and there's mutual accountability, right? So it's incredibly important. Again, I cannot stress this enough that there is consistent supervision and it is connected to the performance evaluation, and you're using the PDP as an opportunity to develop alternative opportunities for folks to lean into skills, knowledge, and attitudes that they may need to develop to really meet the requirements of their responsibilities or their requirements of their position. So performance evaluation at its overall is to monitor and assess job performance. And as I mentioned day one, this is not something that happens just this time or within this particular period. It's the overall job performance, right? So when you're writing that performance evaluation, you're able to go to your supervision notes and really go back and pull examples to really do a really comprehensive assessment of job performance. It also provides performance-based feedback and also assures that feedback is understood and discussed. And you use a structure such as the supervision session that will help to lessen anxiety and assure that the supervisor's goals are met. Okay, so that's the whole premise of performance evaluation, and that's also embedded in your supervision that you're doing or you're conducting. Okay, so when we lean into all of this, right, we've now come to the different pieces that we've leaned into. Now let's talk a little bit about counselor development. Before we get into counselor development, I think I'm going to open it up to any questions or any insights that folks would like to share, just for a minute or two. Just making sure I'm looking through. It looks like everyone is like, move on to module 7. All right, so how do we begin this process of counselor development? And we've kind of led up to this through a variety of different means, right? So we've covered so far the definition and roles. We talked about the personal theory. We've leaned into the importance of the supervisory alliance that supports all of this work that you're doing, the modalities and methods that you're utilizing, some assessment resources, and we've leaned into the full kind of meaning of a performance evaluation, that it's not just a one-time thing, it's something that is happening in a continuous fashion in all of your supervision. So module 7 is verbalizing a process for facilitating professional growth of supervisees, appreciate cultural and contextual factors that impact the supervisory relationship. And we're going to lean into a professional development plan, because you will be asked to submit a professional development plan to finish out the remainder of your hours, okay? So when we talk about the stages in the growth process, we're talking about some key things. One, a common understanding of supervision, that everyone understands the importance or the need for supervision. We continue considering the uniqueness of the supervisee. We're doing firsthand observation of job performance through a variety of different measures. So we're talking about direct observation, whether that is audio, video, whether that is in vivo in the room. Assess strengths and priorities for improvement. We do feedback and coaching to enhance awareness, and we negotiate a plan to guide the process and establish measures to assess progress. And so when we think about this, this sounds very much to that parallel process of a treatment plan or a service plan, right? So some things that we need to consider when we're doing this is becoming self-aware, right? Aware of our own potential feelings and thoughts as they may impact the supervisory relationship, right? And how we may perceive performance, etc. We're engaging in a supervisee-centered relationship, and we're also being culturally responsive. Now, when we talk about being culturally responsive, we need to circle back to the supervisory alliance, because that sets the stage for all of this to happen, right? So when we talk about the supervisory alliance, we also need to lean into that there are different things that can play a role or impact that supervisory alliance, and can also impact the way that messages are received and the way that folks are impacted by the feedback that we are giving. So these are just some of the potential things that we need to lean into, to be aware of our own thoughts and feelings around. This is not an exhaustive list, but all of these things have the ability to impact the way that we think, the way that we feel, etc. Okay? So just kind of leaning into some of that, and then lean into recovery status, ethnicity, gender, race, education. All of these things are in the room of the supervisory alliance, whether we choose to acknowledge them or not. They're in the room. And so we want to be aware of if any of these items become really present, that we address them and we attempt to remediate them as much as possible. So some strategies for relationship building, because it's something that we always are attending to in the supervisory alliance. And we talked about this in the past, is examining your own biases and assumptions. And we talked about this in module 3 in regards to the supervisory alliance. Establish and discussing differences openly, increase personal sensitivity, valuing the differences between ourselves and our supervisees. We're promoting contextual understanding. We're using context to strengthen relationships. We're creating collaboration. And ultimately, we're promoting learning and growth. We're providing proactive staff training, and we're creating an environment of multicultural communication. This is leaning into not just what we've talked about thus far in our opportunity today over the last couple of days, but also what you learned in the online portion of this opportunity. So some simple steps that we want to lean into and to constantly being diligent around the supervisory alliance is avoiding generalizations, being aware that many factors affect how people think, perceive, and act, okay? My favorite one is to ask questions rather than assume, and do not imagine that you know all there is to know, okay? Ask questions rather than assume is a big one, because when we operate based upon our assumptions, that might not be what's happening, or we may not have communicated what we thought we communicated. The person may not have understood, etc. So it's always good to do that check-in. So we've kind of covered a lot of this, the stages in the growth practice. We've been climbing up that ladder, right? Climbing up that ladder. So we've gotten to the point where we're now talking about negotiating a plan to guide the process, because we've talked about what supervision is, the uniqueness of the supervisee, firsthand observation of job performance, assessing strengths and priorities for improvement, and feedback and coaching. So now how do you pull all of this together, right? We have the performance evaluation, right? But that's an ongoing, continuous component. And of course, we have maybe an end of year performance evaluation, et cetera. But how do we address challenges as they become apparent in the supervision process? And I think, Felix, you mentioned this earlier today when you talked about how do we pull this all together, right? How do we plan for if we see that, or if we evaluate that someone is having a particular challenge around a particular competency, what do we do with that information, right? What do we do with that information? And one of the tools that you utilize to do this is, hold on one second. Ta-da, there it is. A planning tool or the professional development plan. You all received a PDF version of this, so you will see this on your initial email from day one, but I'm going to go through this, right? So some of the elements of any planning tool, and you don't necessarily have to use the PDP, but it's a great tool for you to use because it set all of these main elements in motion, is you're going to target a competency, right? You're going to target a competency. You're going to identify the client, not the clients, the counselor's strengths, right? Because we're coming from a strength-based perspective. We're going to lean into specific concerns, right? Specific concerns around that competency. We're going to identify and target the KSNAs, the learning activities, and the measurement of progress, right? So how do we do this? If you think about these elements of the planning tool, the professional development plan meets all of those moving pieces. So let's go through the PDP. So one, we are identifying the practice dimension that we are looking at or we're working in, right? So for example, with Megan, we identified clinical evaluation and we identified treatment planning. There may be a particular element that's connected to that as well, so you can add that in there. Now, in regards to the competency to be addressed in the page number, you can decide whether you want to put the page number, it's up to you, but you should put the competency that you're addressing, and you're only utilizing one competency for the PDP. Okay, and you can do multiple PDPs. This is not a one-time thing. This can be at any given time during your supervision with the supervisee that you identify a space for additional learning opportunities. So you're going to identify the competency. You're going to identify I keep saying client because I'm so wrapped up in parallel process, but you're going to identify the supervisee's strengths. So for example, in the case of Megan, you identified that she was able to establish a rapport. So that would be a strength, right? And other strengths. Challenges and concerns. You really want to be thoughtful about the challenges and concerns that you're identifying, right? What does that look like? And we identified a number of challenges and a number of concerns with Megan in regards to that particular case study, right? Then we're going to go into the performance rating, right? So we're looking at the level of proficiency, and this is where the rating from the rubrics comes into play. So you're landing where, what is the present level of proficiency from the rating form, right? So you've talked about and you've talked through a particular competency, and this is where you're landing. You and the supervisee are landing in regards to the current level. Okay, 1, 2, 3, or 4. Okay, that's where you're landing. Sorry, it jumped. Then you're moving to the level of proficiency to be acquired while using this learning plan, right? So let's say, for example, someone is at a level 1 of awareness. What level would be appropriate for us to lean into for achieving once this plan is in action? It might be 2, it might be 3. Right? We want to do this in a way that is achievable for the supervisee, right? Because we're doing this parallel process. So we are where folks are landing in regards to their level of competency. They're going to engage in particular activities to develop their competency so that it reaches a higher level. And that's the level of proficiency we're hoping to achieve, right? Of course, we have a target date. The professional development plan can be anywhere from a month, it could be 2 weeks, it could be anything. because it very much is dependent upon the competency and what you're identifying that you're going to be working on together as a team. Then we have the K's, the S, and the A's. This is directly related to the competency, right? So remember in the addiction counselor competencies, the TAP 21, you have the K, which is the knowledge, the S, which is the skill, and the A, which is the attitude. Now, for any particular competency, you can choose to address any one of these areas depending upon where the person is at this particular time, or you can address all three, but you're picking one K, one S, one A if you're determining that you want to look at the competency in its totality. Or you may determine, based upon your rating, that this is a knowledge challenge. So we're going to focus just on knowledge. Now, when you put the information or when you write the PDP, if you're focusing on knowledge, right? Let's say, for example, knowledge, it is appropriate for you to write in the knowledge space, the knowledge area that you're focusing on. So you're identifying it in the knowledge. If it's a skill you're focusing on, you're identifying the skill and you're putting it in this section here. Okay? Everyone clear on that so far? So I'm going to ask for someone to give me a playback of what has been discussed so far. Someone feel comfortable with that?
Okay, I'm gonna give it a try.
Okay, you want me to start at the top?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, the foundation practice dimension. I'm kind of, I don't know. Okay, I can go to the TAP 21 to identify the competency to be addressed.
Right.
Okay. The strengths, the challenges, I don't have a problem with that. Now, down here where it says present level of proficiency, we're talking about the strengths and the challenges.
So in the current level of proficiency, it's okay if I help? Okay, the current level of proficiency comes from the performance rubrics. So remember, you have the 1, awareness, 2,
okay,
the knowledge, etc. That's where you're pulling that proficiency from. So the foundation practice dimension is identified from the rubrics. The competency comes from the TAP 21. The strength is there, all right? The challenges concern is there based upon the competency, and the current level of proficiency is the rating from the performance rubric.
okay.
Okay. And then, and what happens here with the level of proficiency to be achieved?
Okay, so if say the present level is 1,
right?
The level to be achieved can be 2.
Yes.
Okay, and the target date, I have that.
Okay.
Okay, so now here, I'm deciding on what needs to be done. Okay, say knowledge. Okay, then I'd go to the goal that would be what's to be accomplished, what basically what knowledge is. Say there, it's treatment planning. The goal is for them to be able to design a treatment plan. Okay. And how is this going to get the next column, activities necessary? How is it going to get done? Matrix.
How are you going to measure it?
How am I going to measure it?
Yep.
Okay. And the target date of completion.
Right.
So now if there's enough, say there's another challenge, and basically it needs the attitude. It's the same process.
Yep. So just the
Okay.
one correction I'm going to make, if that's okay,
Mm-hmm.
is under the knowledge. Remember, you're pulling from the KSA, you're pulling those statements from the competency.
Okay.
Okay, so if I'm
Okay.
identifying knowledge, then I'm putting which knowledge component of the competency are we leaning into?
Okay. I'm still looking for the page for that. That's in the tab 21, right?
Yes, so
What-
if you go into one of the competencies, remember, the competency is in the gray area, right? So then you go on down, it tells you what the competency is. If you go, you see the K. So you would pick one of the Ks if it was a K,
Okay.
knowledge. If you have skill, then you would pick one of the skills that's listed. And if it's an A, you would pick one of the attitudes that was listed and you would put it in these areas. Okay.
Okay.
Would it be helpful for folks for me to go back to the competency so we can go through it? Okay, so let me go back to that. Hold on one second. And the reason why I'm focusing on this is because I'm showing you how to do your PDP. Okay, so this is the competency, right? So this is what would go in the competency section. This competency that's in the gray. Okay, we have the K, the knowledge, we have the S, which is the skills, and the A, which is the attitude. You would pick, if you decided, if you and the supervisor decided this was a challenge around knowledge, you would pick from one of these here, and that's what you would put under knowledge. Okay. If it was a skill, you would pick from here. Which skill is it? If it was an attitude, you would pick from here. Okay. Now you may pick from one area under these competencies. The two of you may pick from one area, or it may be one of all three.
Mm.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm going to ask for someone else to do the playback as well.
I just have a really quick question. Is this real or imaginary? Like, are we actually meeting with the staff? Yeah.
The PDP is real. You actually have a copy of it.
Oh, no, I mean, we're just supposed to envision a staff member that we would be having this conversation with.
Yes, there we go.
Okay. I just want to make sure we're not like actually talking to the staff member because it's gonna be out of the blue and that's weird.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that's the other thing too. Remember, this is intro, right? This is all this stuff needs to be introduced.
Mhm.
So as I mentioned before, you don't just kind of have a staff person come and say, okay, we're gonna do a PDP.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So you want to introduce this. Another way that folks have identified this is as a CAP, a corrective action plan. So there's a lot of different ways that this has been identified, but this is one tool that you can use, right? So that's why it's important as you're rolling this out, you're introducing it, you're leaning into the competencies, you're going over the performance assessment rubrics, you're leaning into the PDP and what that looks like, and you practice it with maybe one or two people first. So you work out how you're going to do this and then roll it out potentially to all of your staff if that is your plan. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just had a question also. So when we get to the part of the metric, right? And how the progress will be measured. That's where we're actually using the rubric, correct?
That could be how you decide. That's what.
But that's a decision.
That's a decision between you. Yes, that decision between you and the supervisor. So for example, for knowledge, it might be, the metric might be the person will attend a training and come back and do a presentation in the next group supervision. Right? That's all to be decided. This is all negotiated. Everything is negotiated here. What you want to lean into is remembering the premise of a treatment plan. SMART, right?
Yes,
Is it
yes.
measurable? Is it achievable? What's the timeline that folks will achieve this? Now, remember, when you do the competency, right, you may have addressed a number of areas. This may be your overarching time to complete this, but you may have different completion dates for each one of these areas.
Right.
Okay?
Okay.
Okay. So can somebody do a playback for me? Let me see if anyone's raising their hand. I see folks like, no, I don't want to do a playback. And it's okay. I see a lot of processing going on. It sounds like somebody was going to do it. Felix, was
I mean,
that you?
I could try. I could
Okay.
try.
Okay. Want me
So
to go to the top?
yeah, you can go to the top.
Okay.
So the foundation practice dimension would be dimension 1.
Mhm.
And
And
then
that comes from where?
the foundation practice dimension comes from the, let me just make sure I'm correct. Comes from the participant workbook. No, it comes from the addiction counselor competency. Is that right?
Just if it's okay if I can make a correction.
Yeah, you
It
can make
comes,
from
it
the,
comes from the performance rubric.
I'm sorry, the performance rubric, right? Okay.
Okay. So
I
practice dimension and element all comes from the performance rubric.
Right, I have the dimension 1. And the element is the screening,
Mhm.
right? And then this element from the screening is like what we discussed in terms of one of the clients, one of the staff was working with the client, and it seemed like the staff could have reviewed the treatment options more appropriate for the client's needs, characteristics, goals, and
Mhm.
financial resources, right?
Right.
Just to be specific on that.
So you would do the overarching here would be the competency. That's the
Yes.
art, that's the competency, just the competency that's in the gray.
Okay, right.
And then this is where you'd go into the detail,
Okay. So
right down at the bottom.
okay, so I'm going into the competency,
Mhm.
the strengths of the actual staff or clinician or counselor or peer would be that they are very strength-based, and they have a lot of life experience
Mhm.
that they can use as a tool to kind of get through to the person that they're working with. Challenges and concerns would be really just being able to set boundaries, at the same time be able to stick to the goals and the objectives that are applicable to what the patient or the client or the peer actually needs.
Okay.
Right. Proficiency level would be I would say out of 1.
Okay, that's awareness.
That's awareness, right? And then the level of proficiency to be achieved would be we want to get to like a 2.
Okay.
Right? Because we want to be very incremental, kind of like specific, measurable, and moving slowly towards the highest level. And the target date to complete the plan would be within the next 90 days to 180 days.
Okay.
The knowledge, the skills and attitude. So it could be either one, right? It doesn't have to be all 3 of them.
Yes.
Is that
Absolutely.
correct?
Yes.
Is that correct? So I would go with the skill
Okay.
to be accomplished that's measurable would be more documentation and ensuring that they're learning how to utilize the tools to document appropriately, to ensure that the documentation is also tying in to the goals that they're working with the client on, right? And
And
it's
you
clear.
would document in this area the skill that you're pulling from the KSA.
Right. Right.
The specific skill would be documented here.
Okay. I will put that there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so the skill would be the documentation skills, right? Engagement
Well,
skills,
if you look,
engagement skills.
if you look under the competency, you would pull one of the skills from under the competency.
Right. So the competency would be help. I'm going to competency 24, right?
Okay.
And competency 24, the skill that I'm specifically targeting is really I would imagine it's really more of, as I said, accurately identifying the client's beliefs in the frame of reference in terms of how it's applicable to what they want to work on in their
Okay.
in their treatment.
Is that one of the skills that's listed under the S?
Yeah, it says that accurately identifying the client's beliefs and frame of reference.
Excellent. So that goes right here.
Okay.
Then
And
what's
then
the goal?
and then that's where I'm actually I'm probably gonna need a little help from you on in terms of, so the goal is really to achieve a desirable outcome that's applicable to what the client needs are, right? But also to ensure that this documentation is happening accurately.
Okay. And what are the activities necessary for them to achieve that goal? What would be done? What would need to be done?
In order to, it would be engagement, it would be screening, it would be assessing, it would be collaborating with the client.
Mhm. Okay. Do you have any activities in particular? Like, would you review documentation, anything like that?
Yeah, definitely. I would be reviewing their notes, their treatment plans, their progress notes, and what the goal that has been created for the client
Okay.
in their treatment plans, particularly.
And that's also how you would measure if progress is being, if progress is progress happening, right? So they would,
Yes, it all
they
ties
would,
into their treatment plan, basically,
yep. And your target completion date.
and the target completion date, right?
Right.
So that would be my PDP. I'm still learning. I guess I'm talking it, but eventually when I start writing it, hopefully it'll be a little more, it'll set in more, right?
Yes. And thank you for that, because the reason why I'm asking for the playbacks, because I'm walking you through how your PDP should look for your assignment. Okay. So
Okay.
what you're going to be doing is you're going to be choosing a supervisee, right? Choosing a supervisee that you currently supervise and complete a PDP for them. Okay. If you do not currently supervise anyone, you're going to use Megan. Okay. You're going to use Megan. And what you're going to be doing is you're going to be completing a PDP on one competency, and you will be submitting it for review. And I'll review the PDP, and depending on the PDP, it will either, you'll either complete the PDP assignment and it will be done, or if there's any comments and you may need to make corrections, you will be notified if you need to make corrections. Okay?
And then after the corrections, we'll send it back to you again, or how does
Yep,
that go?
send it back again.
Okay. And how are we completing the PDP, on a PDF file? I mean, a Word
Yes.
file, or?
Yes, you
It'll be
have the PDP. It was sent in your initial email.
I
You can
do, but
also,
but it's not on a Word file, is it?
okay, you can either convert it,
I
or
don't have
you
that.
can,
I don't have that access. I'm sorry, to convert.
no worries, or you can write it in. That's fine.
Okay, we can write it in. Great.
Okay,
Okay.
well, I have a question. Where it says staff name, if you're using a real staff that you supervise, you don't put their real name in there.
Absolutely not.
Okay,
Okay.
but
So someone is saying, just so I'm clear, the mandatory assignment is preparing, no, not the supervisor's professional development plan. It's the professional development plan for the supervisee. It says professional development plan at the top. The supervisory professional development plan that you received is for you, okay, to use for your own professional development. Okay, but make sure that you're completing the same, the professional development plan for supervisees. Okay, and you have a copy of your own professional development plan for yourself.
So
But
we
you
need
as a supervisor.
2 at this time, 1 for us, 1 for supervising.
Right, so you're only completing 1 for the supervisee. The supervisor professional development plan is for you for your own reference.
When is the due date to send it to you? The due
And
date?
the due date, hold on one second. I just want to answer this other question. Are we turning both into you? No, you're only turning in the professional development plan for the supervisee. That's it.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Question, are we emailing it to who again?
The email will go out after today, probably out later on today, giving you instructions on how to complete your PDP and how to submit it.
So
Okay.
completion of this course is contingent upon accurately completing this PDP.
Yes,
So if we don't get this PDP correct, we're not going to get credit for this course.
you're going to get the PDP correct.
All right.
Because you'll give us, if there's some challenges with the PDP, you will receive feedback to, hey, can you make this correction?
Okay. All right. Great.
Okay.
We'll get guidance.
Nobody is going to not get credit for this course. The
Okay.
due date, what's today? Thursday. I'm going to make the due date Monday.
And you'll send us an email about the due date and what's needed to be done, right?
Yes.
And who to send it. Okay.
Yes, you will receive an email. Okay, so I'll make it due about Monday.
that's Monday the 29th.
Yes, Monday the 29th by 5 p.m. Any other questions? Okay. So,
I have a question. If
sure.
during the course of doing this assignment, if we run into any problems, is there any way to contact anybody for help?
Yes. You will be able to reach out once you receive the email, you can respond to the email. And I think my email address is also on there and I answer questions.
Okay.
Okay, and if for some reason you want me to, if it feels like, okay, just saying it over the phone or via email is not the learning style that is more conducive to you, I will also set up a call to walk you through it as well.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So we have now come to the end of our time together, folk. And so I wanted to take the last few minutes to ask for feedback, aha moments, and all that good stuff. And to just kind of close us out from because we've been together for 12 hours now, right? So how are folks feeling? Any aha moments?
I just had a question. I know you, I'm believing that you did say it, but when will we receive the email?
You'll probably be receiving it probably before the end of the day.
I'm definitely can say that I feel a bit more confident with working to enhance and strengthen the alliance and the learning of not only myself as working directly as a clinical supervisor director, but also what my people that I work with directly, you know, my staff and my clinicians and counselors and peers, and really, really strengthening that alliance and really reinforcing the learning environment. And that's what I get at this. It's all a learning environment. And when we initiate that learning environment, I think everybody sort of benefits from it, from staffing to clients to the overall arching goal, which is the qualitative care that we're trying to provide to everybody.
Mhm.
So thank you so much, Dr. Blackwell.
You're
Great.
welcome. Thank you. Oh, okay. So I'm seeing some things here. Thank you. It was a great training. I really enjoyed it. Okay, some folks had needed to head out. You are the presenter, so it made it a bit easier to remain focused and not get anxious like I usually do. Thank you. Thank you for the training. There's also an evaluation that you will need to complete. The evaluation link is posted in the chat. So please go to the evaluation. That's there. You can click right in and complete the evaluation. You'll also get another opportunity, I think, to complete the evaluation as well when the email is sent, but we definitely want to lean into completing that now. Thank you. It was great training. Thank you for your facilitation. I always appreciate that. You know, the thing about this particular opportunity, whenever I've done it, it's only as good as the people who are present in it, right? So you actually make the training. I'm the one presenting information and facilitating conversations. But if you guys don't participate, you wouldn't have a training, right? So I'd like to thank you all for all of your amazing questions, feedback, aha moments, everything. And as you continue to process this information, right, the recognition that you show yourself some grace, that you receive some information that you need to practice, how you're going to integrate it, whether you're integrating it now, at a later date, etc. This is all for your professional development, okay? So I hope that you all had an amazing opportunity or learning opportunity, that you had at least one thing. If you have at least one thing, that I have done my job for the last couple of days, one thing. And I appreciate all of you participating, okay? And please have a great rest of the day. We'll be signing off in a couple of minutes, okay?
Thank you.
Right. Take care, everybody.